There's also other systems that work in a similar way, or at least don't have a true one-to-one snap and switch on them, such as our IKFK spine, for instance. First of all, let's take a look at the actual IK spine itself and see what it does. The IK spines on my characters are done in what's known as a contrapposto style. This will actually make more sense if I turn the legs on. So we can see that moving these controllers around create a natural motion into the body itself. In this case, moving the hip causes the hip to tip automatically whilst the chest stays upright. Moving the chest causes the hip to tip, and also rotating the chest will cause the hip to tip to counterbalance for you. This works on the side to side, the up and down like this, and also gives a distributed twist action when turning in this fashion. Obviously, because the hip here is automated, the only rotation option it has is the twist, which again distributes back up towards the chest. Now once again, if you're switching into FK mode, you can key off the FK controllers just like that. When you switch your spine back, the FK controllers will hold those same rotations. However, you notice that there is something of a shift going on here. This is because with characters that have the IK spine, there is a tertiary root item here, which exists as a child of the root offset, which you can see is named the root IKG in this case. In order to keep the snap, you need to also key this item, because it is the item that is performing the constraint for the body. As you can see, this spine is working independently of the whole root structure. But as long as we've keyed that root IK, then when we slide back into FK, you'll notice that everything stays put. The non-one-to-one matching again occurs when it comes to actually blending off into IK from FK. You can see the goals here are shifting as I come into FK mode. If we rotate our spine somehow in FK, with a bit of a twist like that, we can key the IK goals, and when we switch into IK, you do again get a little bit of a shimmy occur. So again, this isn't a one-to-one system. The reason it's not a one-to-one system is because of the way that the spine works. It isn't a direct IK system, it is this contrapposto system, which as you can see is very loose and gives very fluid animation. That requires some sort of auto-solving for these in-between spine joints. Of course, that auto-solve is distributed between them, and so of course in FK mode, distribution of rotation between your spine joints won't always be even, whereas of course when you're in IK mode, it is always even. So it's this switch between an uneven set of rotations and an even one, and a set of even ones that causes this offset. So again, when going out of FK and into IK on the spines for those characters that have it, it's handy to treat this as a blend. The other thing that's worth noticing whilst you are in IK mode for the spine is that this hips controller still functions independently of the whole thing, so you can put additive motion onto your hips as well if you're wanting to. Quadruped rigs that feature an IKFK spine also function in a very similar manner. The difference here is that of course the spine is reversed, and so the chest only has the distributed twist function on it, whilst moving the chest around will cause it to always point itself back towards the hips, and the hips movement will give you this kind of an action. The spine works really nicely in quadrupeds, allowing you to get your easy reversals of the contour of your spine whilst animating, which gives you very natural motion, whilst not requiring a huge number of keyframes to make it work. So you again get this contrapposto effect, the two masses of the body, the hips area and the chest area. Of course, you've still got the independent hip control here. On top of that, it works exactly as it did with the biped. The only thing to notice that is different when doing a quadruped in this way and switching is that it does not have a root IKG. The quadruped, of course, has a double root system. It has its main root here at the chest position, and it has a secondary root here at the hip. And so, of course, you key that secondary root, the hip root, also key your spine controllers there, and then when you switch it back into FK, everything stays put. Again, you get this little slide on the IK controllers. So if I were to repose somehow using the FK on the spine, and then of course key my IK spine controllers, throwing it back into IK would again cause a small shift between the two, as the automatic and the manual systems cross over slightly. Again, it's a small shift, so working it as a blend is very easy to do. Squash and stretch, of course, I've said, is there on all of my rigs, and it's pretty simple. You just grab your controllers and translate them, and there's your, squashy, stretchy actions going on. Nothing particularly unusual about that. Of course, that's working with FK. Cool thing about it, though, is that it also works perfectly well with the IK. So when we've got a limb that's in IK mode like this, we can still grab the FK controllers for it. We can move those out. Usually in their Z-axis is the best option, and this will allow you to have scalable IK limbs. Works in that fashion. No problem. So of course IK and FK stretching will match into one another both ways, no problem at all. As we already saw, the extremities are able to just be scaled up, which will enlarge that part of the character. That works nice and smoothly. If we look specifically at the feet, however, when the leg is in IK mode, you can still scale up this FK control, and the entire IK system for the foot scales with it. That all works seamlessly together as well. No problems, mess or fuss with any of that. These systems are completely integrated with one another. You won't get any nasty gotchas going on when working with them. And some of the more advanced rigs will actually have a stretchy attribute that can be turned on, which creates auto IK stretching that works in this fashion, stretching the limb out when it gets beyond its extension point. That of course will blend off back and forth with the IK-FK switching quite seamlessly. The control that we see in our limbs when it comes to squash and stretch, these items at knees and elbows, which allow us to offset the knee or elbow position from the actual main controller itself, we see here, and that works exactly the same whether you're in the IK mode or the FK mode for the limb. These controls can also affect the deformation. Being scaled, you can squish and stretch the entire limb in the various axes as you deem fit. The thing that is worth noting with these, of course, is what we see. For instance, let me scale it back on the Y here, so I'm getting a very flat, thin limb. Of course, the scale is hierarchical. So if I'm scaling my limb down like that, and then I bend it at the elbow, we see what happens. The scale is now applied in a different axis because the deformer portion here in the lower arm has changed its relative axis. Scale is inherited. Ideally, this squash control for the limbs should be used when the limb is, stretched right out. As we see here with our stretch limb, create the kind of stretch that you would get when stretching a limb out in this fashion, mostly with cartoon characters, of course. Doesn't work so well on limbs that are bending. Wanting to be able to scale a limb down like this on a limb that's bending, it's better to do it with a morph map. The things that these knee and elbow adjusters allow for is an actual offset of the twist at that point. So by rotating them on their bank, you can get precise control over the amount of twist taking place in the geometry at the elbow and knee points as well, allowing for small deformation corrections in those areas should they be needed. The last controls then to really show you are those controls that help you deal with deformation in your characters. We already saw on the biped and quadruped how you have these bones to control the buttocks here that give you manual control on top of their automated action there. And of course the quadruped also has these bones for the scapula. The quadruped also has a little null here at the chest, which you can move around to smudge the actual torso portion about. Can often help with quadrupeds as they tend to have very flexible spines, and so being able to mush the shape of the guts is very handy. But this will also scale, if I jump into scale mode here, so this will allow me to actually, squidge his belly in and out as well, either side to side or also up and down, which helps me to maintain volume in the torso when of course quadrupeds are leaping around and their spine is flexing a lot. There is a similar controller in some of the bipeds as well, which is a chest control like this. This of course helps you to smush the torso about when you're getting into extreme poses, to help clean up your deformation in that area, but it can also be used as a little breathe action as well, which is very quick and handy for animation. And the other control that you will sometimes come across on some of my bipeds is a little shoulder adjustment here, which handles the deformer piece at the actual shoulder point. This isn't the shoulder control offset, which is different, see? There's actually a deform adjuster on just the shoulder area itself. So you can mudge shoulder about a little bit, and you can also rotate it to get just the right amount of twist into your shoulder. So all of my rigs will use an auto shoulder roll, so this deformer will twist and turn automatically, but if you're wanting to under twist or over twist slightly, some of the rigs also have this manual adjuster that let you get extra motion in there if it's required. So let's see some of the customization options that you can make to a rig. These are mainly to do with the automated systems that any given animator might like or might not. Take for instance the head float. The neck will automatically twist and also bank over to match the rotation of the head, but won't work with the pitch as we saw. You can alter this behaviour simply by selecting the neck controller, bringing up its motion options, and in the rotation panel of its controllers and limits you can alter the behaviour here. So for instance you can turn off the same as item control in its heading and bank, which will leave the neck as being fully manual when you're in head float mode, or you can turn the pitch to also be same as item, in which case it will function along with the head. So that's a nice easy little tweak that you can make if you want to. Also, in respect of the IKFK spine, the hip controller for the IK spine always rolls itself to maintain this kind of pose effect, but once again you can turn that off, open up its motion options and simply set its rotation instead of point at target back to keyframes for the heading and pitch. Now the hip will still work, but it simply will not rotate, whilst the chest portion will still rotate just fine, and of course you get manual rotation over the hips portion. This works exactly the same on the quadruped's IK spine, except of course you want to be changing the options for the chest goal rather than the hips goal. The other thing that you can tweak on all of the characters is the behaviour of this foot control null, which of course gives our ankle raise here on its y-axis. Now depending on the character you might want that to be able to come even further up or even further down, and the only way that that is affected in the rig to stop it behaving past a certain point is it simply has limits. If we look at its position tab here we can see that it has limits turned on for the various axes that it moves in. You can deactivate or alter those limit values, and that will in turn alter the behaviour of that. There is one last change that you can make in your rigs, and this harks back to the issue of gimbal that we saw before when we were talking about the offsets. Of course the offsets have a lot more usefulness to them than just avoiding gimbal lock, although that is one of the main reasons for the offsets. However, many animators dislike working that way, and there is another way that we can work that will help us avoid gimbal lock. If we take any of our 3D joints, for instance the shoulder here, we bring up its motion options, we can add the modifier Quaternion Booster. What we are now able to do is animate these joints in local axis as much as we want. So if I come out to say frame 10 here, I'll bring the arm down, out to frame 20, bring it all the way up, which should ordinarily have gimbal locked me of course, and if I check my parent axis we can see that I am indeed in gimbal lock, but we'll go back to local, come out to frame 30 and push our arm outwards that way. Now of course what we would normally expect to see is we would expect to see that slipping around of the axis as we first did when we were looking at this issue, but what we'll find with the Quaternion Booster applied is that it all works correctly. See, if I open the motion options and I disable Quaternion Booster there, we're back to the gimbal slip behaviour again, an awful mess. But with Quaternion Booster turned on, that is fixed for us automatically. If we look at the parent axis, we can see how the fix is occurring. The axes are simply being flipped on a single frame in a stepped behaviour. But if we look at our graphs, we see that we still have nice clean graphs that we can work with. So I can set these to spline, and I can still graph my movements in the usual way, and I will get the correct behaviour. If we go through and we bake the keys off, then of course our graphs take on quite a different appearance, and we can see where the flips are occurring. But of course, whilst animating, the Quaternion Booster modifier does give us a great way to be able to use these 3D joints in local axis without having to worry about the gimbal issue, and without having to use the offsets in order to navigate around gimbal lock if that's the preferred workflow of a given animator. And that really is all there is to show, so I hope that you'll get on nicely with the rigs and find them fast and efficient to animate with, and that this guide has helped you in that.